Nick couldn't wipe the grin off his face the whole way home. He hadn't anticipated hearing about the promotion for another few weeks, but earlier that morning, Rosalind had barged into his office with the good news. "Nick, the higher-ups were impressed with how you handled the Japanese situation. We see no reason to wait. Congratulations, you're our new vice president for Far East sales." Nick had been taken aback but grateful. He spent nearly an hour with Rosalind discussing the perks and responsibilities of the new role. Afterwards, Nick was too elated to stay in his office any longer. He called Suzanne in to share the news. "Suzanne, looks like there's a change in roles for you," he announced with a grin. "Nick, am I getting replaced?" Suzanne's face fell, genuinely hurt. "Not at all, Suzanne. You know I couldn't manage without you. You'll just be working for the vice president for Far East sales now. Think you can handle it?" Suzanne's face lit up with joy, and she hugged Nick tightly. Despite being older than Nick by about 15 years, Suzanne had been by his side at Thomaston Chemical since his early days there. They were close friends, with Nick even helping Suzanne's son secure an internship at the company. Excitedly, Suzanne bombarded Nick with questions about the new job. Finally, he managed to squeeze in a word. "I'll need you to hold the fort today, okay? I've got to get home and share the news with Emily." After another hug, Nick hurried to the parking lot, already envisioning champagne and a relaxing afternoon in bed with Emily. But as he turned onto Thornton Drive, he spotted Emily's VW heading in the opposite direction, too far away to catch up without speeding. Cursing under his breath, Nick tried calling her cell, but it seemed to be off. Disappointed, he parked in the garage and headed inside, hoping they'd still have some time together later in the day. He dashed upstairs, shedding his business attire for more comfortable shorts and a t-shirt, then returned downstairs with a quick sandwich and a beer. As he headed towards the backyard patio, he noticed that Emily had left the computer on in the study. Out of sheer curiosity, he approached to see what she had been up to. Her email was open, but it wasn't her school account. Instead, it was a Hotmail account under the username Jane309, which combined her middle name and birthday. Why did she have a second email address? Curious, he glanced at the sent folder, spotting only two names, her sister April in California and an unfamiliar one, spritz@yahoo.com. There were around 8 messages to that address, including the most recent one. Nick clicked it open. "Jay, your message made my nipples stand up. I can't risk Sunday, no telling what Nick might be doing. Let's meet there Monday at 11. I can't wait." "My sweetie E." Nick sat back in shock, staring at the screen. What was going on? Foregoing his lunch, Nick grimly delved into Emily's email and conducted some online investigation. It took an hour before he pieced together the whole story. Jason Pritzker was an educational consultant who had conducted workshops at Emily's school in early May. His webpage displayed a handsome man in his late 30s, a bit older than Nick and Emily. Married with kids, he lived in Jefferson Meadows, about 25 miles from Nick and Emily's house in Grove City. From their exchanges, it was evident that Pritzker had set his sights on Emily during the workshops and had been pursuing her since. Their messages started cautiously but became increasingly open and passionate. Pritzker had written 2 weeks earlier, describing kissing Emily as the most erotic experience of his life. Though they had met alone at least 3 times, it seemed Pritzker hadn't yet gone all the way with her, but he was close. His latest message to Emily expressed his longing to be with her completely. Emily had confided in her sister April about the affair, who unsurprisingly tried to dissuade her. April referenced a friend's similar situation and warned Emily of the potential consequences if Nick found out. There were several other messages from April, all urging Emily to reconsider her actions. "Nick loves you, Em, and he's a great provider and an amazing father to Charlie and Ben. You've told me yourself that you couldn't ask for a better husband, and that your love for him has only grown over the years. So, what's going on?" It appeared that Emily struggled to come up with satisfactory answers to that question, though Nick's perspective was understandably biased. In one of her early messages to April about Pritzker, she mentioned, "I'm not planning on doing anything with him, it's just harmless flirting. And I have to admit, it's fun. Married life can feel so monotonous sometimes." Teaching, cooking, cleaning, the usual routine. When I'm with Jason, there's excitement. He makes me feel young again. I'm not risking my marriage for this, it's just a little thrill. And in a more recent message, just relax, okay? It's just a fling, it probably won't even last a month. And I'm being extra careful to keep Nick from finding out. But I can't deny the thrill when things get heated. It's exhilarating. And afterwards, I'll be back with Nick, happier than ever. And probably even more passionate. He's going to love it. Nick knew he had to leave. He couldn't bear to face Emily right now. He needed time to process the shock, the hurt, and the anger. He left the computer as it was, quickly finished his sandwich, tidied up the kitchen, changed back into his work attire, and exited the house. An idea was already forming in his mind, but he needed some space to think it over. Nick was a decisive and driven individual. At 14, he pursued the largest paper route he could manage to increase his income. In college, he completed his business degree in 3 years to jumpstart his career. And when he met Emily, he pursued her with fervor and romance. He learned about her interests, surprised her with thoughtful gestures, and proposed after 8 months of courtship. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but Nick believed it was fulfilling. Emily was affectionate, humorous, and a wonderful mother. Though their sex life had become routine due to their busy schedules, it was still satisfying. Nick had been completely unaware of Emily's restlessness or frustration, let alone her potential affair. And it infuriated him to the core that she was engaging in it so deliberately. This wasn't a drunken mistake, it was a calculated act of betrayal, with someone else actively pursuing her while she relished the excitement of a fling to spice up her routine life. As he stepped through the door around 6:30, Nick had already formulated his plan. He had spent hours exchanging messages with his friend Brian, who worked in IT, and had obtained the necessary file and instructions. Nick was seething with anger, and he intended for Emily to sense that something was wrong, even if she couldn't quite pinpoint it. He greeted Emily in the kitchen with a kiss, but his eyes avoided hers, and he pulled away from her hug quicker than usual. Throughout dinner, he maintained a distant and troubled demeanor, deliberately causing Emily to notice his unusual behavior. When they were alone in the bedroom later, Emily voiced her concern about his mood, but Nick evaded her questions, claiming he needed time to think. Emily's genuine concern only fueled his frustration. As Emily attempted to initiate intimacy, Nick played along but deliberately withheld his usual enthusiasm, intending to make their lovemaking unsatisfactory as part of his plan to unsettle her. Throughout the encounter, Nick couldn't shake off his anger and disappointment, knowing that Emily had betrayed their marriage in such a callous manner. As Emily eagerly guided him between her legs, Nick hesitated. He allowed her to position his cock inside her, but his movements lacked enthusiasm and energy. Mentally picturing Emily with Pritzker, he imagined the intimate moments they might have shared, causing his arousal to wane noticeably. Continuing to thrust into her half-heartedly, Nick gradually slowed down until he withdrew his now flaccid cock and rolled to one side. Emily, shocked and dismayed, questioned him about his sudden change. Avoiding her gaze, Nick mumbled an apology, attributing his lack of enthusiasm to being preoccupied with his thoughts. He excused himself to the bathroom, secretly reveling in his act of retaliation against Emily's betrayal. Returning to bed, Nick kept his back turned to Emily, feigning disinterest as she attempted to comfort him. Throughout the weekend, he maintained his facade of distraction and concern, further worrying Emily. When it came time for Charlie's t-ball game, Nick feigned busyness, declining to attend. Emily, understanding but concerned, offered her support, unaware of the turmoil brewing within Nick. As soon as Emily and the boys left, Nick took the opportunity to install a keylogger program on Emily's computer, allowing him to monitor her online activity. Discovering her password, he ensured the program was operational and began monitoring her interactions. Refusing sex and distancing himself from Emily, Nick spent the weekend playing with his sons, all while Emily's apprehension grew. By Sunday night, Nick's standoffish behavior left Emily visibly frightened, unable to comprehend his sudden change in demeanor. Monday arrived, the day Nick had designated to confront the situation head-on. Over breakfast with the kids, he masked his inner turmoil with forced smiles, attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy. Despite his efforts, he couldn't shake off the troubled thoughts lingering in his mind. Departing for work at 8:30, Nick drove most of the way before parking in a KFC lot. With his laptop in hand, he accessed Emily's Hotmail account, hoping to gauge her reaction to his recent behavior. To his satisfaction, he discovered 2 new messages in her inbox. The first, sent by Emily on Sunday afternoon, expressed her concerns about Nick's distant behavior and hinted at underlying tension in their relationship. The second message, a brief and definitive one to Pritzker, conveyed Emily's decision to end their illicit involvement. Nick leaned back, contemplating the situation. While Emily's response indicated a level of concern for their marriage, it fell short of resolving his underlying fury and distrust. He couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal and questioned whether this one incident was enough to prevent future transgressions. Fueled by a mix of hurt and anger, Nick refused to accept Emily's actions as a sufficient resolution. Despite her decision to cut ties with Pritzker, Nick remained resolute in his plans to address the deeper issues plaguing their relationship. At 10:15, Nick returned home unexpectedly, having informed his office of his morning absence. His original plan was to catch Emily preparing to meet Pritzker, but she had canceled their rendezvous. Instead, he found her on the phone, likely speaking to her sister. Surprised by Nick's sudden appearance, Emily quickly ended her call. Concern etched on her face, she approached him. "Nick, is everything all right? I wasn't expecting you home." Nick wore a grave expression as he motioned for her to join him in the living room. "Emily, please, have a seat. There's something I need to discuss with you." As Emily settled on the couch, watching him pace with uncertainty, Nick sensed her growing apprehension. Finally taking a seat across from her, he began, "Emily, I had planned to talk about this tonight, but driving home, I realized there's no ideal time. I've come to a decision. I'm moving out, and I think we should get a divorce." Emily's mouth fell open in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief. She struggled to find words. "Nick, why? We love each other. We have a wonderful marriage. Why would you do this? Why leave me and the boys?" Standing up to pace, Nick continued, voicing the thoughts that had consumed him since Friday. "There's a lack of excitement, Em. Our married life has become routine, work, home, bedtime routine with the boys, and then repeat. I need something more, something that ignites passion and excitement." Glancing at Emily, he noticed her pallor, wondering if she recognized her own words echoed back to her. "I've met someone who—" "No!" Emily interjected, her voice desperate, tears streaming down her face. She rose from the couch, pleading with him. "Please, Nick, tell me you're not." "I'm not having an affair, Emily," Nick assured her firmly. "I wouldn't betray you like that. I haven't even kissed her, haven't even touched her. And I won't, not while we—" He paused, observing Emily's anguish, her body trembling with emotion. With a heavy heart, he concluded, "But I need that spark, that feeling of being desired. I want to feel like a man again, not just a tired, aging husband. Listen, I'll be away on a business trip until Friday. I've got a motel room reserved for when I get back. I'll call you and we can find a time to talk, figure out how we're going to settle things. If you want to speak to a lawyer, that would probably be a good idea," Nick explained calmly. Emily looked at him in horror as he retrieved the suitcase from behind the couch. "No, Nick, please, honey, can't we?" "I'm so sorry, Emily," he said softly, his heart heavy as he listened to her sobbing behind him. Despite his anger and hurt, he couldn't help but feel for her. She was in agony, and a part of him wrestled between feeling vindicated and wanting to comfort her, to reassure her that everything would be okay. "I fucking enjoyed that," Nick thought to himself with a grim satisfaction as he sat at his desk, staring out the window. He had gone straight to work after leaving Emily, using the excuse of a business trip to give her some time to reflect on their situation. He briefed Suzanne on the situation when she came in, explaining that he and Emily were experiencing some tension at home and he needed a few days away. Suzanne expressed her sympathy and offered her support, sharing a similar experience from her own past. The 3 days passed quickly for Nick. He stayed at a nice hotel near his office, working late into the evenings and focusing on his new responsibilities. Despite feeling lonely and missing Emily and the boys, he remained determined to stay the course. He checked his phone and emails regularly but avoided listening to Emily's messages, deleting them without hesitation. The business trip gave him a glimpse of what a divorce might entail, and it only reinforced his resolve to address their issues and find a resolution. Of course, that wasn't the original plan. The plan was to frighten Emily thoroughly, to instill a sense of deep concern in her, and see if that would be enough to redirect her focus back to their marriage. If not, well, Nick would tackle that challenge when it arose. Exercising a commendable level of self-discipline, Nick refrained from checking Emily's secret email account until Thursday afternoon. He wanted to see what she had been up to, but he also didn't want to subject himself to constant torment. Upon inspection, he found no correspondence to or from April. Clearly, they had been conversing over the phone. However, there were 6 messages from Jason Pritzker since Monday morning. Why had Emily changed her mind? What had caused the sudden shift in their dynamic? What had he done wrong to provoke her apparent anger? It was evident that Jason was feeling the sting of rejection, particularly in response to Emily's curt reply to his 5th message on Wednesday. "Jason, let it go. I'm not going to see you again. Stop contacting me." Emily. Jason had reached out once more, albeit with less enthusiasm, expressing a resigned sentiment of "okay, but keep me in mind." He understood that he had been defeated, at least for the time being. And, Nick mused to himself, I've emerged victorious, for now. But for how long? That remained the looming question. What would prevent a recurrence of this situation? On Friday around 11 a.m., Nick called Emily from his cell phone. He aimed for a tone that balanced professionalism with warmth. "Hi, Emily, it's me. How are the boys?" "Nick, my God." Emily's voice quivered with emotion. "How are you? I've missed you so much. And the boys, I'm boarding the plane in a few minutes, okay? I'll be home for dinner tonight. I was thinking, could your parents perhaps take the boys on Saturday, have them stay overnight for a visit, so you and I could have some time to talk?" Nick could hear Emily gathering herself. I'm sure they'd love that. I'll call them today and arrange it." "Sweetheart, what would you like for dinner tonight? I want to make something really special." Nick chuckled softly. "Oh, I don't mind, don't go to any trouble. Make something Ben and Charlie enjoy, hot dogs, whatever." "Okay, honey." There was a hint of disappointment in her voice. Perhaps she expected him to readily embrace her again? Nick shook his head. "Got to run, see you tonight. Bye." He ended the call without waiting for the expected "I love you." Nick's return was joyous. The boys greeted him eagerly, excited to share their stories and show off the Columbus Clippers hats he had brought them. They reveled in his attention, engaging in playful wrestling and eagerly taking part in a backyard catch with their baseball gloves. Emily observed the scene with a palpable sense of sadness. While she embraced him upon his arrival, he withdrew sooner than she hoped, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of despair as he immersed himself in their sons' lives. Perhaps she had entertained a fleeting hope that his startling declaration was a temporary illusion, but it was evident that things were far from returning to normalcy. Nick allowed Ben and Charlie to stay up past their usual bedtime, partly to prolong Emily's evident distress, but mostly because he had genuinely missed them. Only when their exhaustion became apparent did he agree with Emily that it was time for bed. Once the boys were settled, Nick wasted no time in retiring to bed himself. Before Emily could initiate a conversation or attempt to seduce him, he was already drifting off to sleep. When she sought to engage him, he gently deferred, citing exhaustion from the trip and the boys' energetic activities. Saturday morning breakfast was subdued, although Charlie and Ben remained exuberant in their excitement over their impending visit to their grandparents. Nick quietly relished Emily's sorrowful demeanor and simply stated, "We'll talk when you return," as she departed with the boys. Upon Emily's return, the house was eerily empty, leading her to anxiously await Nick's arrival. When he finally returned with U-Haul boxes in tow, she couldn't contain her emotions and broke down in tears. Nick comforted her, urging her to compose herself so they could have a mature discussion. After a tearful interlude, Emily composed herself and offered to speak first. Nick nodded, signaling his readiness to listen. She leaned forward, her gaze pleading as she spoke. I don't want a divorce or a separation. I want us to be together, Nick. I love you, and I know you love me too. Our marriage means everything to me, and I want to make it work. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to improve our relationship. Just tell me what I need to do to make things right. Nick maintained a neutral expression as he listened to her. The excitement is gone, Em. We can't ignore the routine of daily life, the chores, taking care of the boys, managing the bills. Can you honestly say you haven't felt it too? Haven't you been tempted to seek something more exciting, something or someone to reignite that spark in your life? It was a moment of truth. Nick wondered how she would react. Would she cry, storm out of the room, or deny everything? Instead, she admitted, yes, I felt it, Nick. And I've made a huge mistake. I'm afraid that when I tell you everything, you'll leave and never come back. She trembled, squeezing her fingers tightly, but she kept her gaze fixed on him. With a composed demeanor, he asked, "What are you talking about?" She stood up stiffly, retrieved 3 pieces of paper from a cabinet, and handed them to him. I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud, so I wrote it down. I'll give you space to read it, but promise me, Nick, promise me that you'll talk to me about it before making any decisions. He looked at her tear-stained face and agreed. Taking the papers, he retreated to the living room to read them, while he heard her sobbing as she went to their bedroom. The contents of the letter didn't reveal much that he hadn't already suspected. Emily had met Pritzker at a seminar, where he had subtly flirted with her and eventually persuaded her to set up a private email account to maintain their communication. There were 4 instances where their interactions had crossed the line, culminating in intimate encounters in Pritzker's car. Nick couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disappointment as he read through the details. It was clear that Emily had betrayed their marriage, indulging in a secret affair that she had hidden from him. Embedded within the letter's heartfelt apologies and declarations of love for Nick, Emily didn't spare herself from harsh self-criticism. She admitted to being foolish and naive about Pritzker's initial attention and later acknowledged the seriousness and wrongfulness of her actions. She confessed to deceiving herself, disregarding her marriage vows, and acting as if her flirtation with Pritzker was harmless. She expressed profound shame for her selfishness and childishness, recognizing that her desire for excitement didn't justify her betrayal. Emily assured Nick that although she hadn't engaged in physical intimacy with Pritzker, she acknowledged the possibility of it happening if Nick hadn't intervened. She vowed to cut ties with Pritzker completely, expressing remorse for not realizing the damage she was causing to their relationship sooner. Emily wondered if investing more effort into their marriage, rather than indulging in the flirtation with Pritzker, could have prevented their current situation. She pleaded for Nick's forgiveness and the opportunity to make amends. Nick sat in contemplation for a while before joining Emily in bed, where she lay asleep. He observed her for a moment before exhaustion overtook him, prompting him to undress and fall asleep beside her. Later, he awoke to find Emily naked and desperate for his affection, kissing him and pleading for his love. Despite his uncertainty about their future, Nick allowed her to continue, finding solace in their physical intimacy and reciprocating her affection as she passionately engaged with him. Then, she shifted positions, urging him to lie on top of her between her spread legs, repeating "please, baby," as he entered her smoothly, both groaning with pleasure. He thrust into her as she clung to him tightly, kissing his neck and moving her hips rhythmically until he climaxed inside her. Afterward, they lay together, still embracing, Emily quietly weeping into his shoulder while he held her. Whenever he attempted to move away, she held onto him tighter until he mentioned needing the bathroom, prompting her to release him. When he returned and sat up against the headboard, he studied her pained and uncertain expression. "How can I ever trust you again?" he questioned, his tone tinged with anger. She nodded, bowing her head. "I know," she acknowledged, her voice laden with remorse. "What I did was terrible. I have no excuse." Then, she confessed, "I didn't actually have sex with him, though." Angrily, Nick retorted, "But you were going to, right? Until I disrupted your plans?" Once again, she nodded, tears visible on her face. "How can I trust you? How can I live with the constant fear of another man trying to seduce you?" he demanded, his frustration evident. Her demeanor shifted to hopefulness and nervousness. "Are you considering giving us another chance, Nick?" she inquired tentatively. I don't know, he admitted, conflicted. There's the saying, once burned, twice shy, but there's also once a cheater, always a cheater. How do I know you won't betray me again when life becomes mundane? Feeling overwhelmed, he abruptly decided to leave the room, putting an end to the conversation. He got dressed and announced his departure, suggesting Emily prepare dinner or order takeout, indicating they could discuss further later. He left for some relief, spending time at the driving range, enjoying the distraction from his marital turmoil. However, the relief dissipated on his way home, despite the pleasant surroundings and distractions, as he contemplated the uncertain future of his marriage. What next? Nick's inquiries to Emily weren't just rhetorical. He had accomplished his initial goal by ending her affair and instilling fear in her. Now, however, came the challenging part. How would they rebuild their marriage? Emily prepared paella, a favorite of Nick's, and they ate in silence, her eyes scrutinizing his face for any indication of his feelings. Once they cleared the plates, Nick suggested they move to the deck. As they sat with cups of coffee, he confronted her. You messed things up. How do you plan to fix them? Do you still want to be with me? Emily asked tearfully. Yes, I love you and the boys. But you've shattered our marriage. How do we move forward? Nick replied, his frustration evident. Please, just wait, Emily pleaded, wiping away tears. After composing herself, she explained her plan. First, she promised full disclosure of her actions, emphasizing her remorse and willingness to answer any questions. Second, she vowed to apologize sincerely and repeatedly until he understood the depth of her regret. Kneeling before him, Emily expressed her sorrow and acknowledged the pain she caused. I'm so sorry, Nick. I hurt you deeply, and I'm ashamed of my actions. I hope for your forgiveness, but I know it won't come easily. Returning to her seat, Emily outlined her commitment to making amends. She pledged to demonstrate love, patience, support, and attentiveness daily. She promised to pamper him, fulfill his needs, and inject excitement back into their relationship, even in the bedroom. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our marriage, she declared, holding his hand. Even if it means spicing things up and exploring new experiences together. And what about Dee? What about the other woman I'm interested in? Nick's expression remained neutral as he looked at Emily. Emily nervously bit her lip. I can't control that, Nick. I'd prefer if you never saw her again, but ultimately, it's not my decision, is it? But I do have a request. Do you think we could give it a try for a month? Just you and me? I'll do everything I can to make you happy, to keep you engaged and satisfied at home. I want to show you how sorry I am and how much I adore you. Nick stood up and walked to the other end of the deck, his back to Emily, a grin forming on his face. He felt a mix of anger, excitement, and self-satisfaction. He had pursued what he wanted and seemed to have achieved it. Or so it appeared. Turning back to Emily, he said, Okay, Em. I'll give it a month. I wasn't eager to leave this house and the boys anyway. And I won't see her again while we're working on fixing things. Emily eagerly approached him with a smile, but Nick raised his hand to stop her. Don't think for a minute that I'm not furious at you or that I trust you. What you did with that guy was low and disgraceful. It was beneath you and certainly beneath the love I've given you. It was awful. With that, Nick stormed back into the house. A month passed, then a few more weeks. Nick didn't mention the deadline, and neither did Emily. Things were okay, Nick thought. They got along fine, and Charlie and Ben seemed oblivious to any issues, which was a relief. Emily was attentive, loving, and devoted. They had a lot of sex, more than Nick could have wanted, and Emily was eager to please him in every way. She introduced new things in their intimate life, surprised him with gestures like planning a weekend getaway, and even bought seductive lingerie. It seemed like she was trying to please him as if her life depended on it. But despite all this effort, Nick couldn't shake off a feeling of discontent. As he sat at his desk in the midst of a busy workday, he pushed aside his tasks, leaned back, and took a moment to reflect. It was clear that Nick still harbored a deep lack of trust towards Emily. The betrayal with Pritzker, even though it hadn't escalated, continued to haunt him, leaving a bitter taste whenever he thought about it. While his logical side acknowledged that Emily would never repeat such actions, the fact that she had betrayed him once lingered like a painful reminder. His anger towards her simmered beneath the surface, although it had somewhat subsided. However, Nick recognized another troubling issue. Emily seemed to have transformed from a wife into a servant. She was constantly on edge, always seeking his approval and tiptoeing around him to avoid any hint of displeasure or anger. It felt as though her sole purpose had become catering to his every whim and desire, even before he voiced them. In the earlier, happier days of their marriage, Emily had been a vibrant and independent partner. She had her own opinions, stood up for herself, and wasn't afraid to challenge Nick. They had shared an equal and loving relationship, unafraid to tease and challenge each other. Now, all of that seemed lost. Nick acknowledged that he had changed as well. He had become more distant and guarded, no longer sharing the details of his day or engaging in meaningful conversations with Emily. Instead, he observed her from a distance, allowing her to serve him in various ways, even in intimate moments that she found degrading. Deep down, Nick realized that he didn't want a submissive companion, he wanted his old wife back. Yet, he also recognized that his own behavior had contributed to the current state of their relationship. He was aware that he had no clear path to restoring what they had once shared. As September entered its third week, Emily resumed her teaching duties but continued to maintain the facade of the perfect wife. She prepared special dinners, bought lingerie, and engaged in energetic sex, all while wearing a cheerful demeanor. However, Nick could see the strain beneath her facade, especially when she thought he wasn't looking. The breaking point came one Thursday evening when Nick returned home to an unexpected confrontation. As he greeted Emily in the kitchen and leaned in for a kiss, she recoiled and confronted him with a cold and accusatory tone, revealing her frustration about not being informed about his promotion. Before Nick could respond, Emily turned away, dismissing any words he might have had. "No, don't even say a word. I'm going to get the boys," she declared, storming out into the yard to call for Charlie and Ben. Throughout dinner, as they ate and the boys chatted away, Emily shot Nick murderous glances. It was almost amusing, and Nick realized it had been close to 2 months since he last saw his wife angry with him. He found himself strangely enjoying the confrontation, though he couldn't explain why. Emily rebuffed all of Nick's attempts to help with putting the boys to bed, so he gave up and watched a rerun of NCIS. When Emily entered the living room around 9, it was clear she was ready to confront him. Fine, Nick thought. Let's have it out, let's see where this leads. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was, speaking with Suzanne today? Emily glared at him, standing with her arms folded instead of sitting down. She reminded me to remind you about bringing your passport for visa arrangements for your upcoming trips to Japan and Singapore, she continued. Then she asked, Emily, are you proud of him with his big promotion? Did you have a big celebration? I was speechless. Finally, I managed to stutter out, yeah, it's been great, or something like that. I felt like a complete idiot, Nick. And I'm sure Suzanne could tell I had no clue what she was talking about. She mentioned you were promoted back in July. It's been over 2 months, and you didn't say a word to me. Was I supposed to go on not knowing my husband is the vice president for Far East sales? Is this suddenly none of my business? As Emily paced the room and eventually took a seat, Nick remained silent. She continued to express her disbelief and anger, feeling humiliated by the revelation. I know our marriage is hanging by a thread, and I know it's my fault. Not a single hour passes without me thinking about it. But you promised we'd try to make it work. I thought that meant communicating, sharing news like, oh, I don't know, a huge promotion. Emily fell silent, glaring at Nick with tears welling up in her eyes. Well, Nick began, you certainly seem upset about this. Of course I'm upset. Emily interjected. But do you remember when exactly I received the promotion? Nick asked calmly. Emily's expression turned pale, and she looked down. Yes, I do. I found out about you and Pritzker before I had the chance to tell you about the promotion. Nick's voice hardened as he spoke. And, by the way, I found out about it the same day, I came home at lunchtime and saw your email open with your messages to that guy. Emily gasped, staring at him in disbelief. He had never revealed this before. When I realized you were keeping something important from me, something crucial to our marriage, I didn't feel like sharing my news with you. Is that hard to understand? He continued, his tone firm. Shaking her head, Emily looked miserable, the fight drained out of her. Nick stood up, pacing now. So yes, I should have told you. But I guess I enjoyed keeping my secret from you, Emily, some tit for tat. At least my secret was something positive, not sleazy and selfish. I'm going for a walk, he announced, striding out the door without looking back as he left her quietly crying. The following morning, breakfast was prepared and the boys were readied for school in almost complete silence. Nick didn't know what Emily was feeling, but he himself felt calm, even relaxed. Their argument and his subsequent walk around the neighborhood had provided clarity. Upon Emily's return after seeing the boys off, she headed to the bedroom without a word. Nick's voice startled her, causing her to jump slightly as she turned to face him, appearing unhappy and wary. How about I bring home takeout tonight, so you don't have to cook, he offered. That would be nice, Nick, thank you, she replied carefully. They discussed various options and settled on Five Guys hamburgers, a favorite of the boys. And I'd like us to spend some time together tonight when the boys are in bed, okay? Nick added. Looking more concerned, Emily nodded. Nick approached her, holding her gently and kissing her, feeling her tense in his embrace. The boys enjoyed the hamburgers, and Nick and Emily worked together to bathe them and tuck them into bed, sharing a smile as the usual bathtub water fight ensued. Once the kids were asleep, Nick and Emily settled at opposite ends of the living room couch. The camaraderie they had while caring for the boys had faded, replaced by tension emanating from Emily. Last night was good, I think, Nick said, watching her wary eyes. Emily appeared surprised momentarily before her expression softened, nodding. Yes, I think so too. They both paused, then chuckled. You can go first, Nick offered. Emily expressed, the reason I think last night was good is because it hurt me so much. So much. I mean, there you were with this huge promotion, this exciting new job, and probably lots more money, and I didn't know anything about it. You kept this huge secret from me, and I. She looked directly into his eyes. I felt so excluded and so betrayed, and I was so angry, and then you told me exactly when you found out, and of course I understood why you hadn't told me. And all this time I thought you only learned about my affair when I told you in the letter. I had no idea you'd found it out on your own. My God, Nick, I am so sorry for that. She sighed. So that took the wind right out of my sails. But when I thought about it later, I realized what a good lesson it was for me. For weeks I've been feeling so terrible about what I did, about how badly I've hurt you, and terrified you're going to leave me, and this is the first time I just felt hurt myself. How could you do that to me? And then I realized, well, Emily, maybe for the first time you're getting a little tiny taste of how Nick has been feeling all this time. Betrayed, left out, kept in the dark. Except the secret I kept from you was 1,000 times worse. She stopped, looking down. He could see the tears on her cheeks. So I figured, anything that hurts me that way, that lets me be in your shoes a little bit, is probably good for me. I've been feeling so guilty and frightened, I haven't spent enough time actually thinking about how you must be feeling. She laughed sadly. After last night, that problem is gone. Nick waited, but Emily was done talking. He said, yeah, I think so too. That's one of 2 reasons last night was good. But the other, strangely enough, is that it was the first time in more than 2 months you've stopped cringing around me. You were furious, you really let me have it, and, guess what, I realized I missed it. They smiled at each other, both amused. I mean, I wanted you submissive, for a while. I wanted you feeling guilty and ashamed, and terrified I was about to walk out the door. But it's starting to get old, you know? Obsequious Emily is not the woman I married, she's not the woman I love. And I realized that while you keep wanting me to trust you again, you haven't been trusting me, not to leave, I mean. You don't trust that I love you, and I'm trying to give you another chance. He was getting a little agitated now, and he took a breath. Why should I trust you, after what you did, when you won't trust me? So you need to do that, Em. You need to start being yourself, and remember how long I've loved you. He paused again. Maybe you were being a doormat because you thought I was insisting on it, but I'm done with that. The month I promised you has stretched to 7 weeks, and I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm sleeping in bed with you every night, and I'm not seeing anyone else. He watched her, thinking about it, and then she nodded her head. Okay, she said. I'll work on that. They spent the rest of their evening apart. At 10:20 Nick was suddenly so exhausted he couldn't hold his head up, so he undressed and brushed and went to sleep. Sometime later he felt Emily slide into bed behind him. She kissed the back of his neck, then snuggled up to spoon him. After that incident, nothing particularly dramatic occurred, but things gradually improved. About a week later, Nick noticed that he felt warmer towards Emily and that their conversations flowed more easily and with less stiffness. One night, when he forgot to pick up the dry cleaning as he had promised, Emily snapped at him for being thoughtless. However, she quickly realized her reaction, looked at him with a hint of concern, and then shrugged before returning to her cooking. Nick acknowledged his mistake and apologized, promising to get the dry cleaning the next day. Emily responded with a small smile and accepted his apology, and they moved on from the incident without dwelling on it. That night, as Emily got into bed wearing her usual nightwear, she cuddled up to Nick and rested her head on his chest. She suggested they make love like they used to in the old days. Their lovemaking that night wasn't extraordinary. It was a tender and slightly awkward affair. They kissed and touched each other sweetly but cautiously, engaging in familiar, missionary-style intimacy. Despite its simplicity, it brought them closer together, and they fell asleep in each other's arms, a closeness they hadn't experienced in a while. I did it today, Emily said quietly as she faced the stove, her back to Nick, who had just returned from work. Nick understood immediately what she meant. They had discussed it a few days earlier. Emily was going to reach out to Pritzker's wife to inform her about his infidelity, in case she was unaware. How did it go? Nick inquired. Emily gave him a brief kiss, looking tired and slightly pale. She explained that it wasn't as bad as she had feared. Pritzker's wife already knew about his past infidelities and was grateful for the information Emily provided. She shared her email address and thanked Emily for forwarding their messages as evidence. It couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, Nick remarked with a slight smile. Emily sighed and embraced him, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Nick. I know I've said it countless times. But right now, I feel sorry for her too, and for what I did. 3 kids and married to that selfish jerk, about to become a divorced single mom. And my actions didn't make it any easier. Honestly, Em, and I'm not just saying this to comfort you, but if it wasn't you, it would have been someone else. Pritzker got what was coming to him, Nick replied. Their relationship was improving, nearing its former state, but Nick couldn't let go of his concerns entirely. And then, a few days before Halloween, Nick found Suzanne quietly weeping at her desk in the office. Suzanne, what's wrong? He asked with concern. Embarrassed, Suzanne looked up and explained that it was about her son, Matt, who was 26. Overwhelmed with emotion, she started weeping again. Nick offered her comfort, leading her to his office to talk privately. Is he okay? Is he injured? Nick asked with concern. Suzanne shook her head. No, it's not that. It's Tina, his fiancée. She broke up with him. Nick sat with Suzanne, offering quiet support as she shared the story. Matt and Tina, only 3 months away from their wedding, had hit a rough patch. Matt had made a mistake during a drunken night out in Miami Beach, where he ended up having a one-night stand with a woman he met at a bar. Tina found out through mutual friends, leading to the breakup of their engagement. She returned Matt's ring and refused to speak with him. Suzanne expressed her sadness over the situation, emphasizing that Matt was remorseful and had expressed willingness to do anything to make amends. He even suggested counseling, but Tina's hurt and anger seemed insurmountable. Suzanne lamented the loss of a once great relationship due to a single foolish mistake. After discussing it for a while, Suzanne began to feel slightly better and thanked Nick for listening. "Don't apologize, Suzanne. I understand. I feel for Matt. Perhaps with time, Tina will reconsider," Nick reassured her. As Suzanne headed to the restroom to freshen up, Nick couldn't shake the story from his mind. It led him to ponder his own relationship with Emily. During his drive home, Nick confronted the pivotal question that had plagued him earlier in the summer: was he better off with or without Emily? The answer became evident. Did he want to navigate the complexities of divorce, seeing his children only sporadically, and re-entering the dating scene? No. Did he believe Emily would betray his trust again? While nothing in life is guaranteed, the answer leaned toward no. Had Emily taken responsibility for her actions and made sincere efforts to reconcile? Yes. Did he still love her, and did their family life bring him happiness? Without a doubt, yes. Nick called Emily while driving and asked if she could arrange for a babysitter on short notice. He expressed his desire to take her out for dinner, not for any particular occasion, but simply to spend time together as husband and wife. He informed her that he would be home in 20 minutes and asked her to share her thoughts then. After arriving home, Nick and Emily went to Bistro Romano, where Nick enjoyed his favorite veal saltimbocca. Emily, having consumed most of the wine since Nick was driving, was a bit tipsy. Once they returned home, Nick paid the babysitter and ensured she left safely before locking the door and dimming the outside lights. In the kitchen, Nick shared the story of Suzanne's son and his broken engagement, expressing his sadness over the situation and emphasizing the importance of not allowing their own relationship to end unhappily. He declared his desire for their reconciliation, indicating that he wanted to move past the hurt and anger to focus on rebuilding their marriage. Emily, holding his hand tightly, agreed wholeheartedly, acknowledging her ongoing feelings of shame and her commitment to making amends. Nick lightened the mood with a humorous anecdote about forgiveness and suggested a playful idea about intimacy, to which Emily responded with a light-hearted offer of her own. They laughed together, reaffirming their bond and sealing their agreement with a touch of humor. Nick took Emily's hand, signaling their unity and mutual understanding as they headed upstairs together. Write your opinion in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Remember, you're writing a story too, and it's up to you whether it's a good one or not.